I'm called Betty, and I've done a lot of unusual things in my life. But first of all, I'll cut it very short. When the war first started, I was living in Canada because my father was posted there, and he came back to Britain. My brother joined the Canadian Air Force, and that left just my mother and myself. We had a job to get back to England. Anyway, we managed it. And that was the first time I realized that war was not a great joke. Remember, I was very young in those days, and oh, it was great. I was going back to England and la la la, you know, so I was running the world. But when we got on the boat, we got about, oh, I don't know, it seemed about 3 miles from land. The 2 boats at the end were torpedoed, and all the people on the boats fell off. And I kept saying to people around me, well, go on, let's go round and pick them up. And a little naval officer came up to me and he said, Betty, be quiet. We cannot go and pick them up. Now, I've let the powers know that there are people in the water, and we hope that they'll get to them in time. I was shattered. You know, I don't know what I thought, but as a child, you know, it was all a great game. And then I realized it wasn't. But I learned very quickly. When we got to Liverpool, the front of Liverpool was ablaze, and I realized that it had been badly bombed. And we, of course, weren't there, but we were lucky. I think they were trying to have a go at our ship because we had a lot of soldiers on it, and they were coming to help us. But there we are. I was back in Britain, and I went to join the RAF. Well, to my sorrow, I wasn't allowed to join because I wasn't quite old enough. But they suggested that I did something else. So I took this piece of paper and went to the place they said, which was a large factory. And when I asked a few questions inside, we were making Oerlikon guns. So I thought, well, if I can't have one, I can probably help with the other. When my father heard me say this when I went home, he thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He said, you don't know anything about steel or guns or anything like that. Are they going to trust you? So I said, well, you'll soon find out. If I'm in prison, please come and help me. You know, we left it at that. And I worked for 2 years in that factory. And to say it was hard, it wasn't at the beginning because I was on day work. But after I'd been there a while, they put me on night work, which I found very difficult. I don't know how all you feel, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, I want to go to sleep, you know, and my eyes had a terrible job staying open. And the men on the benches working were ever so good to me. Every time they thought I was about to go to sleep, they'd say, Betty, Betty, we need something, you know. Whether it was coffee or whatever it was, it didn't matter. They woke me up completely. It was quite an experience. And I learned to be very proud of the women who worked in the factory because, you know, they had children and they left I think it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and off they went home, took the children to school, got meals ready for them, and probably had a sleep in the afternoon, but may not have been able to do it. And then, you know, came back to work at 7:30 at night, 11 o'clock, 8 o'clock, I mean. And, you know, I was so lucky. I went home, and there was my mother, and there was, you know, food was waiting for me, everything was done for me. I was extremely lucky. When my father came back from the Far East, he was posted to the middle of Britain, and of course my mother went too. Then I had to learn to look after myself. That wasn't very funny, but I managed all right. Well, I think you've heard enough chatter for me. Who's the next one?
I was just wondering, Betty, when you left the RAF, you had some very interesting jobs, and you were telling me the other day that you had a job with someone from the royal family. Who was that?
Well, I was very lucky. I was retired and I was at Andover, and the family that I went to work for were looking for somebody, but it had to be somebody who, you know, wasn't going to talk to the press and all the rest of the things. And so they picked on me and sent me for interview, and that was with Her Royal Highness Princess Ellis. She was the Queen's aunt, and oh, she was a dear. She was an elderly lady, very full of life, good sense of humour, and we got on extremely well. And then, of course, the time came after 6 years, I think it was, 5 or 6 years. She had to go to London, and so that was the end of me. And I stayed in the village and got a little cottage and stayed there for a while. And then finally I landed up in, what's it called? Where did we work?
St Dunstan's.
St Dunstan's.
Where did you end up? Where did you?
Which was lovely.
If you could give a message to anybody out there listening here today or out in the streets about being in the RAF or St Dunstan's, what would it be?
Well, first of all, don't lose your sense of humour. Secondly, you know, life is very good and it gives you a lot, so you've got to give something back. And by that I mean enjoy what you do. You can do. There's some sort of job in the Army, Navy or Air Force that you can do, or they wouldn't ask you to do it. Enjoy it and do it properly. And that's all I can say. Enjoy your life.